In this video, I'm going to go ahead and review several of the most common methods that you need to be comfortable with regarding strings for the AP exam. So I'm going to refer to this handout that I have. I will post this as a PDF, and then I'm also going to go through some coding examples, and these will be in a .java file that I will also post as well, in case you wanted to code along or make some changes as we're talking. So first of all, this link here, this Java T-Point, I like this website because they're super easy to follow along with, and they have summaries on pretty much every topic you can think of. So when I was looking for resources to pull together for you guys, I just looked on their website and looked at it from the perspective of somebody who maybe forgot how something worked, and I found that their site was the easiest to just look at for a quick refresher. So this was the link to all things related to strings, and so let me just show you what that looks like real quick. All right, so this is where that link will take you, and you can see that first of all, they have the information on this website for, all kinds of languages, not just Java. But here is the string section, and there's all this different information about strings. There are different methods. So those of you that were saying that you forgot how compare to worked or index of, etc., if you forget, this is a great place to go. I would recommend bookmarking this page because let's say you're taking your AP test and it's an open book test this year, you are able to look up how to use these methods. So I'm going to point out to you the most common ones that you should be very comfortable with because let's be honest, you only have a little bit of time, and I want you to know how to use the most common things inside and out, but this could be a good resource for you to just get better with other methods that you want to brush up on. All right, so first of all is substring. Substring is used all the time, and we use substring when we want to pull out a small portion of a string. And this method is loaded, meaning that there are two implementations of this method, one with one parameter, one with two parameters. If you were to choose the first one, in this case, this will return the substring that starts at index A and goes until the end of the string. The second one starts at index A and goes up to but does not include B. So one way you could think of it is if you were to take B minus A, that would tell you how many characters would be taken. And then remember that the value at B must be less than or equal to the string length. So even if you have a string length of 10, and those indices go from 0 to 9, you could still put the number 10 here, and that would work because it goes up to but does not try to access an index 10. That's how you would actually get the last string character. Index of. So what index of does is it's going to accept either a single letter or a string, and it will return the first occurrence of where that string happens. If the string is not present at all in the string that you were checking against, then it will return -1. Now, in the previous notes thing I put together, I said that there were a couple things you should be able to do. And you should definitely be able to find the first occurrence of a letter or a string, and you would do that by doing index of. Another thing that I've seen is sometimes they ask you when the last occurrence happens. And you can do this many different ways, but when I was looking on that Java T-Point website, I noticed that there was a method called last index of, which I've never had a need to use, and that makes it a heck of a lot easier. That just returns the last spot where it's found. So that's definitely a useful one to know. And then lastly, to find out how many occurrences of a single letter or string happen, for this you would want to use index of, and then you would also want to have a loop along with a counter. And we'll see an example of this when we get to the coding section. Equals and equals ignore case. The way that these methods work is they both return a true or false if the strings that are in there are identical. Now the difference is that equals looks for exactly identical, so same case sensitivity and everything. Equals ignore case just checks if they are the same letters and numbers and spaces and so forth, but it ignores a capital lowercase letter. All right, compare to. This was a biggie that a lot of people were asking about. And when we talk about this, this is what it says on your handout. If s is greater than 2, it returns a positive. If s is less than 2, it returns a negative. If they're equal, it returns a 0. But a lot of times people are like, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, when they say greater than, that means it comes later in the alphabet. So if the string that's coming first, S1, the one that's before the dot, the one that's calling the method, comes later than S2, then when you go ahead and subtract their values, because that's what's happening, we are subtracting their ASCII codes character for character. So when you subtract their characters, if this one happens to be different from this one, when you subtract them, you're going to get a different number. And if S1 comes later in the alphabet, it's going to have a higher ASCII code number. And so when you subtract those ASCII code numbers, you would get a positive number. If S1 comes before S2 in the alphabet, then when we subtract their ASCII codes, we would get a negative number. And then if these strings are identical, all complete identical, every single character and everything, then when you subtract them, every single character would continually give you a difference of 0. And if you get to the end of both strings and you still get a difference of 0, then you return 0, showing that the strings are identical. So here I just gave a small snippet of code. I just created 4 different variables. I made the string called apple equal to apple, ball is ball, car is car, and zoo is zoo in all caps. So when we look at this first one, ball dot compare to apple, since ball comes later in the alphabet than apple, it's going to return a positive number. If we were to look at this from an ASCII code perspective, B minus A, since B is one letter after A, its ASCII code will be one number greater, and that's why it returns a 1. Now, when I do apple compare to car, A minus C, well, C comes later in the alphabet, so its ASCII code number is going to be greater. It is 2 letters later, so specifically when you do A minus C, you will actually get -2. Now, when we get to this one where we do zoo.compare to apple, this is kind of a little technicality that we have to remember. Capital letters, the entire capital letter library, comes before the lowercase alphabet in the ASCII code. And so that's why if you have a capital letter, no matter what it is, even if it's Z, it is going to come before a lowercase letter. And so that's why Z minus A gives you a -7. Because it's giving you a -7, that tells me there must be some other characters in between the capital letter alphabet and the lowercase letter alphabet. And you can Google the ASCII chart if you want to see those numbers. That is nothing that you need to memorize. And then here, if you wanted to compare zoo and apple, ignoring case sensitivity, because let's be honest, if I was alphabetizing something and I couldn't tell if somebody wrote a capital Z or a lowercase z and I alphabetized the word zoo before apple, I think my boss would think I was a moron. So we don't want that to happen. So we would say, okay, let's just make this a lowercase and we'll compare to this word to a lowercase. And so now that's going to compare Z to A, ignoring case sensitivity, and then that would say that Z comes after A. And in this case, it returns a 25. And again, that's because they're 25 letters away from each other. All right, so that's how our compare to works. Whenever you're using compare to, you would want to say something like if S1.compare to S2 is less than 0, is greater than 0, is equal to 0. That is how you would use compare to. A common mistake I've seen students do in class is when they use compare to, they say if S1.compare to S2, and they don't have any less than or greater than with it. But since this does not return a true or false, that would not compile. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about a little bit more is string literals. And this was something that I alluded to in the last video, and a few people said that they were kind of confused by that. So I included a link here where you can get some more information on that. Again, this is from that Java T-Point website. And I also created some additional code that we'll look at in a minute to help you better understand this. But essentially, every string in Java is made of what's called a string literal. And so you can think of it like it's a constant. It's not changeable. It's immutable. And the variable can reference or point to a different string, but the actual string itself doesn't change. So you can save over it, which makes it look like it's changing, but the actual string never changed. So because of this, if you were to pass a string as a parameter in a method, and then when the string is used, you're really only modifying a copy of it. And a lot of times students think that because a string is an object, because it can call methods, they think when they pass a string to a method that they can change the string and then it will still have those same changes when you leave the method, and that is not true. The only way that you can change that string from the calling program is if you return the change string and save it over the original string. That's why all of our string methods, str.to lowercase, .to uppercase, all of those .substring, none of them change the string. They all return a changed string. So notice the difference. They don't modify the string they started with. All of those methods return a modified string. And then if you want, you can save it over the original. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here, and then I will do the second part of this review in a second video where I will go through the code examples.